You're so baseball drag today.
But it's Keith Haring, so it's like...
It's a gay baseball drag.
It's gay baseball drag. When the Vixen and RuPaul got into a fight at the RuPaul's Drag Race Season 10 reunion, they exposed something many viewers have felt bubbling under for seasons. Drag Race has a race problem.
After the first 3 seasons crowned queens of color, the winners since have been overwhelmingly white, and the fan base has grown increasingly white as well.
In this episode of the Kiki, hosts Kevin O'Keefe and Matthew Rodriguez dissect how both the show and the fandom's handling of queens of color has changed, and what the show can do to fix it.
Welcome to the Kiki, where tea is the only beverage on the menu. I'm Kevin O'Keefe.
And I'm Matthew Rodriguez.
And we're here today to talk about queens of color.
A very non-controversial, totally chill subject that will not at all cause any controversy in the comment section.
But it is important when it comes to this show, because I think since RuPaul himself is a black man, I think the show often gets a pass in some ways.
People don't know, when we talk about reality television, that there's actually a lot of cooks in the kitchen making it. People will say oh, but RuPaul's the host, how can it be racist? RuPaul is not the one editing the show.
No,
RuPaul's
not in that editing bay.
We're actually talking about how the show is made as a whole. I think one of the reasons that Drag Race has so much speculation about it is because it is one of the only shows on TV that consistently highlights queer people of color.
Yes.
There's no other show except now Baby Pose. We want to critique it because it's the only show that has queer people of color and we're invested in how they're portrayed. But then also some people want to hold it close and not critique it.
You and I are two people who love Drag Race very dearly.
Right.
But loving something also means being able to admit its faults.
I've never had faults, so I don't.
Wow, the fault in our stars.
This past season, season 10, when people think about race and racism, the name that will come up is the Vixen.
I thought you were gonna say Blair St. Clair.
The Vixen kind of exposed how narratives on reality TV work when it comes to race and racism.
Yeah, the Vixen came in with a real understanding of optics.
The Vixen has spoken about how on the Rusical episode, they had chosen Cher to do for the Rusical, and herself and other queens of color may not have as many reference points for Cher as they might did if they did a Janet Jackson Rusical or a Beyonce Rusical. And Cameron Michaels, who is white, is a Cher impersonator and is able to go out and do that every night. So it does benefit certain queens.
If you remember, there was an Oprah challenge on season 1. There was not a Snatch Game that season. The challenge was impersonate Oprah. That would never happen now.
No, it would not.
That was I think, first and only time that white queens were expected to emulate a black star. It is insane that there's not been a Rihanna runway.
So let's talk about seasons 1 through 3, because there are so many amazing queens of color from those seasons.
All the winners.
And all the winners. We have BB, Tyra, and Raja. They all had their own aesthetic and they were all able to be multifaceted. And then kind of when you get into deep season 7 territory, you very much get all the white queens are different and cool and the black queens are this way.
We could say a lot about Tyra Sanchez now, but Tyra Sanchez won season 2 fair and square. I think if you asked Ru right now, what's your feeling on Tyra Sanchez? She would still generally be
a great queen. I think also Tyra has been talking about race and racism in the fan base. She was the first person that I saw talking about how Latrice is treated like a mammy character in the fandom a lot.
Yes.
She's a non-threatening queen of color.
She does seem to be who a lot of white fans will cite when the point is trying to be made that no, we love black queens. We love Latrice.
Right.
It's easy to love Latrice.
And then of course, you had the moment in season 10 where 3 weeks in a row, we got rid of Vixen, Monique, and then Monet.
Which was interrupted by a week where 2 white queens were in the bottom and nobody went home.
Ru does try to identify with the black queens in a way that doesn't always, it's a lot of projection.
It always feels a little insulting.
It does. The way she talked about Nina Brown, it was as if she was diagnosing her or things like that.
And that happened in the season 10 reunion.
And it happened with the Vixen, right? Saying, I come from the same place she does.
I come from the same goddamn place where she comes from.
Vixen's from Southside Chicago. are you from Southside Chicago?
No, she's from
right.
Atlanta, yeah.
So it's very, understand where she's coming from, but it's also a little, flattening of the nuances of the narrative, right? When we talk about season 7, one of the interesting things...
Sorry, hold on.
And I just think it's really interesting to talk about race with season 7 because that's where a lot of the modern issues in the fandom come from. And how a brilliant queen like Jasmine Masters, who Katya always says is the actual genius of the show.
Katya and Trixie are emphatic on that.
Everyone will go to Katya and be oh, she's the actual manic genius of the show. And Katya's oh, it's Jasmine Masters. Yeah. But Jasmine Masters eliminated 11th.
And turned into sort of a meme.
And only got to the fame where she was now because she's so magnetic and she's so good that people can't look away.
Compare how the show and the fandom treats Kennedy to like how they treat Trixie Mattel, a queen who, by all accounts, was bad.
And admits to it herself. We're not
Yes.
like being revelatory. So she's had 2 like meh runs on Drag Race and is the paragon of like
Despite being a winner, yes.
yeah, and then you've had Kennedy, who's had 2 great runs on Drag Race and is still not as popular within the fandom.
For anyone who's going to argue with us about Trixie, Trixie herself identifies as a white queen. She says she benefits from white privilege. We absolutely are cognizant of the fact that she has Native heritage. We don't want to erase that. We're referring to her as she refers to herself.
You know, she calls out RuPaul for making a song called Geronimo and then makes a joke about Latrice picking cotton. Well, you know what I think is most disturbing about this actually, ever since season 4, so there's been 2 queens of color who have won. Meanwhile, the ratio in the first 3 seasons is 100%. And then now it's 2 out of, you know, all the rest. I think since season 4, the show has felt like it's had this duty, like with Sharon Needles, to like declare the future of drag. And it's very interesting that when you start talking about the future, that's when queens of color are not in the narrative as much. It's like, is the future of drag white? Meanwhile, drag in its modern form, because there's gonna be someone in the comments being like, drag started with the Restoration Theater in 1660s, like calm down, boo. We know you have an English degree, I do too. The modern form of drag was begun by queens of color, like you're talking about New York City clubs like Esquilita that RuPaul will talk about all the time. Like this is who influenced modern drag, and yet it's white queens who are being declared the future of drag.
So we've been talking a lot about the ways in which the show has some race problems, but I think we also need to talk about the fandom. So there are 11 queens, just recently 11 queens who have over 1 million followers. 8 of them are white. Courtney Act,
Aquaria, Alaska.
you've got Violet Chachki, Alyssa Edwards, who's not really a
Not like a
Instagram
looks queen. Sasha Velour,
Katya,
and Trixie.
white presenting, yes. And then 3 queens of color.
Adore,
Delano
Bianca,
and
Kim Chi, who deserves 1 million followers more than any other queen who's like walked into the workroom.
Yes.
She is looks, she is aesthetic. So there's no black queens in that list, first of all. And Shay is a looks queen.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the cocky video alone deserves 1 million
Yeah,
followers.
and Shangela is enormously popular. Like,
Truly.
why doesn't she have 1 million followers?
The fans just aren't showing up to support the black queens as much. People will say you can't help how that is. You know, people are just gonna like who they're gonna like. But I mean, we've talked ad nauseum about how the show created a villain out of the Vixen when she did not need to be one.
When the Aquaria, for example, could have easily been the
Right,
villain.
there's a choice that goes into it, and race is an aspect of that choice. So then what happens when queens rely on popularity, rely on meet and greets for a living, and you create a villain out of one because she dares to talk about racism on the show?
Yes, it's literally affecting her dollars. What can the show do to be better in this regard? I think we can talk a lot about the edit.
Scene by scene, like, don't rely on that racism. Don't rely on that body.
Stop
Don't
relying on that racism.
It's not fair, and you know when you put it out into the world how it's going to be received. And I understand it's a show and you need drama, but like the people are watching regardless, and like you need to throw a queen of color under the bus in order to make your show at the end of the day, right?
Right.
I mean, a lot of people will say, oh, this show has so many queens of color on it, it's not racist or whatever. I think that that is really important to highlight. Like there are so many queens of color who get a platform because of Drag Race, but a lot of the time the show doesn't help everyone. It might give them the initial platform, but that doesn't mean that it always elevates them the same way that it does to white queens.
Well, yeah, I think going into season 11 and a perspective, since it hasn't actually been officially announced, All Stars 4, I think that's something we can really look forward to, is hopefully the show has learned a little bit. Well, thank you for such an insightful conversation. I can't wait to read all of the very level-headed takes about this in the comment section. Yeah, and please like and subscribe. That's what they say on YouTube, right?
I am a fan of the YouTube.
A drag queen named Like and Subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
On the runway, you left us buffering. You're safe.